Hello everyone, Pastor Howie back here with another edition of Readings and Thoughts from the Scriptures. We're going through the book of Acts, section by section, sometimes paragraph by paragraph, and we're now in Acts chapter 20. And as we have looked in the past couple of videos where the Apostle Paul was spending time in Ephesus, and then at the end of his time there, he had decided to go back to Jerusalem by way of Macedonia, and that was interrupted, or at least in the history of the book of Acts as it's laid out, his plan was announced, and then there was this riot in Ephesus, which is where we were in the last video previous to this. Now, as we come to Acts chapter 20, Paul is on his way back to Jerusalem through Macedonia and Greece as he had planned. And so in chapter 20, verses 1 through 6, we read about the first part of this journey. And this is what we have. And you will notice that Luke, the author of this history book, the book of Acts, and the author of the Gospel of Luke, has rejoined them. And we know that because in this passage of Scripture, the personal pronouns again become personal, and Luke is including himself in the journey. So let's read and see what the Lord has for us to understand, to be instructed by, to be edified by, maybe corrected by, who knows. The Scriptures are good for all of those things, and all of those things are good for us. So Acts chapter 20, verses 1 through 6, through Macedonia and Greece. When the uproar, referring back to that uproar in Ephesus that closed out chapter 19, when the uproar had ended, Paul sent for the disciples, and after encouraging them, said goodbye and set out for Macedonia. He traveled through that area, speaking many words of encouragement to the people, and finally arrived in Greece, where he stayed 3 months. So he spent some time in Greece during this journey, this part of his journey. Because some Jews had plotted against him just as he was about to sail for Syria, he decided to go back through Macedonia. So the unbelieving Jews who were considering Paul to be a usurper of their traditions because he was a traitor to their traditions according to them, pursued him, and he found opposition from them almost every place where he went. So he makes a decision then to travel back through Macedonia, and he still is planning to go back to Syria, back to Antioch, and then ultimately back to Jerusalem. So he decides to go back through Macedonia. He was accompanied, and here we find out that there are people who have followed Paul from various places where we've read he's been in established churches. He was accompanied by Sopater, son of Pyrrhus, from Berea. He had visited Berea, where he found that the Jews there in the synagogue were more noble than the Jews in Thessalonica, and studied the Scriptures to see if what Paul was teaching about the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ was true. Sopater from Berea followed him. Aristarchus and Secundus from Thessalonica. So a church was established in Thessalonica, and these two people are following Paul as he travels and ministers the gospel. Gaius from Derbe, he had visited Derbe. Timothy also, and Tychicus and Trophimus from the province of Asia. So they were from what is now Turkey, but no particular villages or towns or cities are mentioned where they're from. These men went on ahead and waited for us. So Luke is back in the picture at Troas. Waited for us at Troas. But we sailed from Philippi, another place Paul had established a church at, after the festival of unleavened bread, which is Passover. So we have an idea of the time of year that they're traveling. It's in the springtime. And 5 days later joined the others at Troas, where we stayed 7 days. So this is kind of an introduction to the group of people that are with Paul and the initial journeying around between Macedonia and Greece, back to Macedonia, still on his way to Syria. But we're giving a glimpse into the fact that there are disciples who've grown up in the churches that Paul has visited and even established, and they are part of his apostolic band, and they are a part of his missionary journey, even though it's a missionary journey that's moving back to Syria, back to Antioch, and ultimately back to Jerusalem. So the saga continues, and what we see is fruit. We see fruit developing from places where the gospel has been preached and where churches have been raised up and churches are raised up when disciples are raised up, and where some of these disciples have raised up to feel called to follow the Apostle Paul in ministry. May that be the case in all of our churches, that as churches grow, not just in numbers, but also especially in depth and maturity, that out of that growth will also come people who will feel called and answer the call to minister the gospel in other places. So it's always a joy to see people who announce that they feel called to ministry and then make plans to have that call confirmed and make plans to go and get their education and then go and give their lives to the ministry of the gospel. I'm sure Paul was delighted to see these people following him from churches that he had established. And we should pray for that to happen in our churches. And so that's what I have for you in this video. Until next time, may you listen for the call of God in your life, whether it's to formal ministry or to some sort of local ministry to people that you already know. Until then, God bless you.